Mr. President, I thank the distinguished senator from Rhode Island for his hard work and appreciate the recognition. And I rise to talk for a minute about this lame duck session. Today we're in the second day of a lame duck session following the elections of a week and a half ago. We face an impending fiscal cliff. We face the end of the year. We face a day of calling, a day of reckoning. And I think I have an obligation as one member of the Senate, and I think everybody has the same obligation, to come to this floor and talk about solutions and resolutions, not problems and what we can and can't do. We are in a very dangerous position, and I've been in this body one other time when we faced a fiscal cliff. It was in September of 2008, and I will never forget it. The markets had been collapsing, the subprime securities had been collapsing, the world was in difficult financial times. The President of the United States, that time a Republican, brought forward a plan to solve that problem, or at least to forestall the collapse of the markets and give us a chance to come back over time. The House of Representatives rejected it, and in that day the markets went down over 800 points in one day. 2 days later, the Senate came back and adopted a plan to move us forward. Markets stabilized, but they were already at the bottom. They'd fallen by 50%. And now here we are, almost 5 years later, still recovering from the decimal drop of the market at that particular period of time. If we don't address the fiscal cliff and take the first step in this lame duck session to move forward in terms of sanity on taxation, sanity on spending, and sanity on entitlements, then we're going to put ourselves in the same position again. You know, I happen to think one of the best lines in President Obama's speeches in his first campaign, and he reiterated in the last one, was when he talked about we're a country not of the red states of America or the blue states of America, but of the United States of America. My predecessor, Zell Miller, former governor of Georgia, United States Senator, once said, you know, you don't find most Georgians on the very far right or the very far left, you find them in Walmart. They want a fair deal and a fair price and a good deal, and they want to be treated right. The American people want to be treated right. They don't want to see their taxes go up at the end of this year. They don't want Congress to turn its back on cutting its spending where it can. And they want us to get entitlements so they're fixed for the long run, not in danger of expiring in the short run. We are this close to being able to find common ground if we'll only take the first step by sitting down at the table. And in the last 2 weeks, I've heard the first step from both sides of the Democratic and Republican Party. John Boehner, a week ago, acknowledged that revenues could be a part of the solution, and he acknowledged he wanted to do it through tax reform. President Obama has reiterated, as he did today in his press conference, that he wanted to raise rates on the upper income. But when pointed to and when asked by a reporter, Mr. President, does that mean there's no line in the sand? That mean it's got to be that tax increase or nothing at all? The President refused to take the bait. He said, I'll listen to other ideas. He said, I'll sit at the table. He said, I'll seek common ground, but it's got to be meaningful common ground. It's got to be meaningful recommendations. It's got to be plans that really deal with our fiscal cliff, deal with our spending, deal with our entitlements, and deal with our taxes. So let me just for a second, if I can, opine on what really all of us know. It is a three-part problem, our debt and our deficit. It is spending, it is revenues, and it is entitlements. And it's not that we don't know what the answers are or the solutions are. They're all on the table. They've been visited by the Gang of Six. They've been visited by Simpson Bowles. They've been visited by a lot of the brilliant people in this chamber. Senator Conrad from North Dakota, who unfortunately is leaving us, has talked about it time and again. Senator Coburn from Oklahoma. Why don't we put those things on the table, sit down around the table, and figure out a formula for success to keep us from going off the fiscal cliff? Because it's one thing to gain the confidence of the world investors and the world body politic. It's quite another thing to lose it. And if you ever lose that confidence, and if you ever go off that cliff and people no longer think this is still the greatest place on the face of this earth to invest their money, then America has a harder struggle to come back than it would ever have by facing our problems now. So for a brief couple of minutes, I just want to talk specifically about those things that can be done. First of all, in terms of spending. We can cut discretionary spending, but we all know that discretionary spending and our deficit are about equal and have been for the last 5 years. Which means if you cut out all federal discretionary spending, cancel the government for a year, all you're doing is balancing the budget. You're not saving any money. So we all know we can't do it totally by cutting spending, but we do know we should, which means we should bring appropriations bills to the floor. We should debate those bills on the floor. We should hold our agencies accountable, and we should manage things on a cost-benefit basis. Do what Gene Shaheen and I have talked about in terms of a biennial budget. Have 1 year dedicated to spending, the other year dedicated to oversight. And we can find savings and we can find revenue to reduce our deficit, but that won't do all of it. And entitlements, we've got to look at entitlements. But that doesn't mean you take away anybody's Social Security or anybody's Medicare, because I don't consider them entitlements in the first place. You, Mr. President, you've paid 1.35% of your income every day of your working life for your Medicare, and you deserve to get it. You've paid 6.2% of your income for your payroll savings, for payroll deduction for your Social Security, and you deserve it. But we all know that those programs were started in 1968 and in the 1930s, and eligibility should be reformed. We should find a way to make eligibility be actuarially sound, just as they did in 1983 when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill raised the eligibility for me so I couldn't get Social Security at age 65. I had to wait till age 66. Did I miss it? No, I didn't think I'd live that long in the first place. But when I did get there, I appreciated the fact that they saved Social Security for me in 1983. We need to save it for our children and our grandchildren today, and we can do it by looking at eligibility in the form. You don't have to raise the tax or lower the benefit. You might means test the COLA in terms of Social Security, but you can fix it if we just sit around the table and talk about it and not take away anybody's eligibility. Medicare is tougher. We can means test benefits in terms of co-payments. We can take plans like Paul Ryan or give people options. Whatever we do, we can sit down at the table and find a way for the future, find to save the Medicare the American people have paid for. And in terms of the safety net, nobody wants to do away with the safety net. But it's time we looked at the safety net and the cost-benefit analysis and the eligibility for the benefit programs so we manage them appropriately like you would any other expenditure of government. And then you go to the tax code, and that's where we are today. That's the stumbling block, seeing where we're going to move forward on taxes. And time is running out. And I'll be the first person to admit it would be hard to come up with a comprehensive reform in 7 weeks to fix the tax code. But it would not be hard to come up with a comprehensive agreement this month, now in this session, to do it early next year and push off putting us off the fiscal cliff. Get a new speed bump next year. Give us the time to sit down around the table and find common ground. Maybe it's means testing deductions, maybe which raises revenues without raising rates. In fact, there's a great argument, and the argument comes from 1986 when Reagan and O'Neill again lowered the top tax rate from 70% to 28% and raised revenues in the same taxable year. All because we raised the base upon which the levy was charged, which raised more revenue, which in the end is the name of the game. My main point, Mr. President, is this. We should not be sitting around twiddling our thumbs. The clock is running. We face a fiscal cliff. There are some in this chamber who have said, oh, we just need to go off of it. We'll go off of it, we'll pay the price, and then we'll finally sit down and do what's right. I would, with all due respect, say that's pretty stupid. We've gone off a cliff once before in 2008, and we're still reading from it today because we didn't deal fast enough with the decisions we had to make as a Congress to address the problems of the people that elected us to come here and manage their affairs. I would submit to you it's about time the American government did what every American family has had to do in the last 5 years. Sit around our kitchen table like they've sat around theirs. Talk about our income like they've talked about theirs. Cut their budgets and spending where they've had to cut because they've had to tighten their belt. Don't you think the government ought to at least ask of itself what it's required every American family to do? So instead of talking about what we can't find agreement on, why don't we start talking about what we can find agreement on? We don't have to just penalize one taxable class of Americans and declare a political victory but not solve our problem any more than we have some obfuscation in terms of tax reform that really is now you see it and now you don't. We can do meaningful reform that accomplishes the raising of revenues and more equity in the tax code. We can cut discretionary spending where appropriate, and we can reform our entitlements. And over time, we can get our fiscal house in order. The great thing about our problem is it's not a problem that has to be solved in one fell swoop. But we have to make a commitment to begin to reduce deficits and in turn eliminate them so we reduce debt. We need a game plan over the next decade that causes us to do that. And when we do, we'll return to the greatness America has always known. But if we don't, we'll not be a good place to invest our people's money. Our rates will go up on our debt service, and America will have a hard time returning to the preeminence it has known. So my message today is this. The President in his press conference said all issues were open on the table. John Boehner in his leadership remarks said the same thing in terms of revenues a week ago. Let's get down at that table. Let's start talking about those solutions. Let's start giving ourselves meaningful goals and not just use the threat of destroying our economy and the investment in our country as a threat to cause us to do nothing. Let's do something. Let's do the people's business. Let's face the music and make it a symphony. And Mr. President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.